There is a loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It grows in a quiet marriage. It sits in a room full of friends. It hides behind the brightest smile. In 1914, a Japanese writer took all the darkness he had gathered in his own soul and poured it into a single novel. He called it Kokoro, the heart. He wrote it not to entertain, but to survive. And in doing so, he gave a name to the ache that millions feel but never speak aloud. More than 100 years later, that book is still doing its quiet work, sitting beside people who feel unknown, and whispering, "You are not the first to feel this. And you are not alone." Kokoro is the story of a young university student and an older man he calls only Sensei. It is the most taught novel in Japan. It has never been out of print. And it is not driven by plot. It is driven by the slow, unbearable weight of a heart that has been unable to tell its own truth for an entire lifetime. When the book opens, the student is drawn to Sensei's quiet dignity. But very soon, he realizes he has stepped into the orbit of a man who is slowly dying from the inside out, not from illness, but from a secret. A secret so heavy that it has walled him off from everyone who loves him. To understand Kokoro, you must know the man who wrote it. In the year 1900, Natsume Soseki was sent by the Japanese government to London. He was brilliant. He was proud. And he was utterly unprepared for what awaited him. He spent 2 years in a cramped room, buried in books, speaking to almost no one. His landlady thought he was losing his mind. He walked the gray streets feeling like a ghost. When he returned to Japan, doctors diagnosed him with a nervous breakdown. But Soseki did something extraordinary with that pain. He turned it into ink. He began to write, not to escape his isolation, but to understand it. The student in Kokoro first meets Sensei on a beach. There is something distant in the older man's eyes. A cool politeness that feels like a closed door. And yet, the student cannot look away. He begins to visit Sensei regularly, hoping to find wisdom. Instead, he finds a deepening mystery. Sensei is married, but seems incapable of receiving love. He has no career, no ambition, no friends. Every week, he visits the grave of someone whose name the student does not yet know. And one afternoon, walking through the streets of Tokyo, Sensei turns to the young man and says the words that will haunt the entire novel. "I am a lonely man. You must not put your trust in me." Why would a man warn someone against trusting him? Because Sensei knows something the student does not. He knows he is not what he appears to be. Behind his calm face lies a wound that has never healed. In his youth, Sensei was once warm-hearted and idealistic. He loved a woman. He had a close friend. But when he feared losing that woman to his friend, he committed an act of quiet, devastating betrayal. He manipulated the situation, and his friend, devastated, took his own life. Sensei got what he wanted, and it destroyed him. The guilt closed around his heart and never let go. He began to believe he had lost the right to be loved. The tragedy of Kokoro is not only what Sensei did. It is what he never did. He never confessed. He never asked for forgiveness. He never told his wife the truth about who he really was. So she loved a man who was not fully there. And Sensei lived every day beside her, inside a glass cage of his own making. The novel's genius is this. Soseki understood that guilt, when carried in silence, becomes a second skeleton. It shapes everything. Sensei does not shout or weep. He simply withdraws, inch by inch, until he is a ghost in his own home. And the student watches all this, knowing he is witnessing something sacred and terrifying. Soseki wrote the novel, while struggling with severe stomach ulcers and recurring mental anguish. He was not a healthy man, spinning tales. He was a wounded man trying to get something out of his chest before it killed him. The novel is structured as a long, final letter from Sensei to the student. It arrives only after the student has left Tokyo, as if Sensei could only tell the truth from a great distance. The letter is a confession of his entire inner life. his love, his sin, his shame, and his decision to die. Soseki understood that the only way to break the isolation was to put the unspeakable into words and offer it to another human being. Late in the novel, Sensei speaks, a line that has echoed through the decades. He says, "You see, loneliness is the price we have to pay for being born in this modern age, so full of freedom, of individuality, and of our own selfishness." Soseki was not praising the old world. He was diagnosing the new one. Japan had rushed into modernity, replacing tight-knit communities with individual ambition. And the more individual we become, the more we stand alone. Sensei is not just a tragic character. He is the endpoint of a modern life that has chosen self-protection over real connection, and found it hollow. But Kokoro is not only about Sensei. It is also about the student. The young man who refuses to look away. He never saves Sensei. He never even tries to change the outcome. But he does something perhaps more important. He stays. He listens. He makes himself available. When the long letter arrives, the student reads it in a single sitting, on a train, as the countryside rushes past. His eyes fill with tears. And in that moment, Sensei's entire lifetime of isolation is finally witnessed. Soseki seems to whisper to us, healing does not always look like a cure. Sometimes it looks like a young person, on a train, holding a letter, and finally understanding. Natsume Soseki never pretended he had solved loneliness. He died just 2 years after Kokoro was published, in 1916. He was 49. But he left behind a book that functions like a quiet room. A room where anyone can go and sit, and feel that their inner isolation has been named without judgment. The book itself is the letter, written not just from Sensei to the student, but from Soseki to you. It says, "Here is the worst thing I ever did. Here is the darkness I carried. And now I am less alone because I told you. And perhaps, reading this, so are you." That is the wisdom at the heart of Kokoro. What Soseki offers is not a solution but a starting point. Loneliness, he shows us, is not a failure. It is a signal. It is the heart's way of saying, something I carry has not been witnessed yet. And the first movement toward healing is not fixing yourself. It is finding one person, or one page, where you can stop pretending. Sensei's tragedy was that he waited an entire lifetime to tell the truth. But the student's role shows us another way, the simple, radical power of listening. When we truly hear someone's inner story, without trying to correct it, or lighten it, or solve it, we give them back their humanity. We say, "You are real." 100 years have passed, and this book still sits in bookshops and on bedside tables around the world. It has been read by teenagers in Tokyo, by businessmen in London, by lonely travelers in airports. It requires no knowledge of Japan to understand. Its landscape is entirely interior, and that is its power. Soseki took the most private, shameful corners of a human heart and held them up to the light. Not to expose, but to comfort. He told us that loneliness is not a personal defect. It is a condition of being alive in a world that often asks us to wear masks. And the moment we find the courage to remove the mask, even for one honest hour, we begin to come home. Kokoro means heart, and hearts, Soseki knew, are not simple. They are vast, layered, and sometimes desperately heavy. But they also have an incredible capacity to reach across time and touch one another. In naming his own darkness, Soseki lit a lamp for countless others who walk through theirs. And in our next video, we will move from the loneliness Soseki named to the solitude another Japanese writer chose, deliberately, even bravely. Haruki Murakami. A man who turned solitude into a well, and drew strange, beautiful, unsettling water from its depths. Join me then. For now, let Soseki sit with you. Let his words be your quiet companion. You are not alone in your aloneness. That is the gift he left us. And it is still, quietly, changing lives.